Welcome to Berries in the Interim podcast, where we explore the cutting edge of innovative clinical trial design for the pharmaceutical and medical industries, and so much more. Let's dive in.
Hello, and welcome back to the second episode of Berries in the Interim podcast. And today I'm so excited because we have again Dr. Scott Berry, and we have his expertise and his role at Berry, which he'll talk about in a second. But also, we have a new guest on the show. His name is Dr. Kert Viele, and I would love to hear from both of you. Give us a brief intro on who you are and what you do, and we'll jump into the question. So, Scott, I'll start with you. Who are you? What do you do? Why are you here?
I wonder that a lot. Appreciate that, Brandon. So I am a biostatistician here at Berry Consultants, president of Berry Consultants, and I have spent, I know our topic today is about adaptive trials, and spent 24 and a half years. We're about to celebrate our 25th anniversary, right. Designing, implementing adaptive trials.
Awesome. Kert, how about you?
I am the director of research at Berry Consultants. I'm also a statistician. I've been at Berry for about 15 years. Before that, I was an academic, and I specialize in all sorts of Bayesian statistics, computation, and clinical trials.
So I have two of the best in the world at what we're about to talk about, adaptive clinical trials, the statistics behind that, the Bayesian approach. So, Scott, you brought up before we started talking that you get this question a lot. Should I think about doing an adaptive design clinical trial or not? And why? What are the pros and cons? And when is the best situation to do that? But first, can you describe what we mean by adaptive design? And I know there's some Bayesian information somewhere in there, but I'll let you guys kind of describe what is an adaptive design, and then why does it matter? Who cares? What are the pros and cons? And we'll go from there.
All right. Well, Kurt's going to get no time left in this. So Kurt, jump in and help me with this. But the promise of it is really to contrast it to a fixed trial where you design it, you say we're going to go to 200 patients, we look at the data at the end. An adaptive trial has components to it that the accruing information in the trial changes key components in the trial. Prospectively design key components. It could be sample size. It could be changing patient population, changing allocations to arms, dropping arms. It could be shifting the trial from a learning trial to a confirmed trial. And it's the information in the trial that creates the prospective changes to it. So it's a much more flexible learning mechanism within the trial. Now, why? Why would we ever do one of these beasts? The hope is that you run a trial. Think about halfway through the trial. You've planned a trial. We're going to look at some point. Halfway through the trial, you look at the data. And if there's anything in there that says, oh, boy, I wish I would have done something else. This arm doesn't seem to be working. These patients aren't responding. There are aspects you learn something by looking at the data, and you say, I wish I would have done something different in the design. This is the ability to do that. And it's the ability to change it to be a better learning mechanism within it. So a lot of the answers to the questions I think Kurt and I should get into is what kinds of adaptations, what are scenarios where you can do that well? And its promise is you learn something during the course of the trial that had you known it when it started, you would have designed a different trial. That's a part where you could potentially have a really nice adaptive design.
I kind of think there's two areas where you might want to adapt. One is an idea of making things more robust and trying to eliminate risks. The basic idea of who should I enroll in a trial? Should I enroll everybody who has a disease or just people with a mild version or a serious version? If I enroll a small population, I could easily, I only learn about a small population. But if I enroll a big one, I could end up, I'm not looking at the right people. I could miss an effect. So one of the ideas of adaptation in that setting is to give you the advantage of looking at both. So I get to see both populations and I can decide which of them works. I can focus on the one that looks better halfway through the trial. And it's all about eliminating that risk of missing the right people. That would be an enrichment kind of trial. The other place, though, I would think about adapting, and I think people see this more, is trying to make things smaller. There's this notion that if your sample size is, say, 300, that somehow, at 299, you don't have the answer. But at 300, the answer becomes clear. And well, that's just madness. What really, it's like you're flying through the clouds and eventually you're going to get the answer and the clouds are going to part, but you don't know when that's going to happen. It's a random process. Maybe it happens at 100, 200, 250. And what adaptation in that sense is getting you is when the clouds part, you can get your answer and you can use the rest of your resources for other problems.
So in all of these, the important thing is when you look at the data at some point, and we're going to get to the whole point of there's this myth in trials that looking at data is bad. And there's a term called paying a penalty. And so there's this notion that looking at data, you have to pay a penalty. It's a bad thing within it. And so we're going to get to that notion. But if you do an interim analysis at a particular time, and by the way, the name of this podcast is In the Interim. So if you're sitting in the interim, the question is, do you have data that helps you make good decisions at that point? And I'll give you an example of a trial. I went to a company and it was a question of, it was a trial to treat obesity. And they were interested in multiple doses and they wanted to potentially change the randomization to more effective doses in the course of the trial. So we sat down and talked about that possibility. And I asked them how long to enroll the trial. And they said, it's going to be probably a month to enroll the trial, which tells you a little bit about obesity. But if you were to look at the data halfway through enrollment, you're 2 weeks in, you haven't learned anything. There's no update to the data that would allow you to make a good adaptation. So you want the data you're adapting on to be somewhat informative. So there's this huge thing we talk about in every trial. It doesn't matter the adaptation you're doing, doesn't matter the circumstances. What's the time to information? So in that circumstance, the enrollment rate was so fast that the time to information is you couldn't adapt. You couldn't adapt well because you haven't learned anything different. The promise is you learn something smart, you make good decisions, and the trial that way is a better decision process.
So we've had a couple examples where, for example, people are working on a knee device, and knee device, you have to follow people up for 2 years. So it's a long endpoint. But in many cases, the endpoints, did something go wrong? Is your pain reduced? Can you walk better? All of those things, you often have a good idea what's going to happen at 3 to 6 months. And so we were able to take databases that they had from other countries and basically predict forward how their trial was going to do. And so even with, we were a couple hundred patients in, only 30 patients had finished, but because of everything we knew about how people's knees behaved, we were able to predict how the trial's going to finish, tell them that you ought to go ahead and stop, you're going to win. And in fact, they did win the trial and get approval.
So I assume this saves some money. This is something we talked about in episode 1, but the idea that you get to the answers that you're looking for a lot faster, more efficiently. Is that kind of, if you are able to stop that trial before that 2-year period, all those 100 people go through that, you can kind of close it down. Is that what I'm understanding? Is that right?
Yeah, it's definitely about saving money. It's about saving resources. It's about getting treatments to patients faster. In COVID, we want to be able to, there's a pandemic raging, we want treatments out there. It's also about getting answers to really more important questions, broader questions. Who should the drug get? What's the exact right dose that we ought to be giving to patients? All of those things that go into making the treatment as good as possible and as tailored as possible is what that aims at. Scott, do you want to?
So let me push on you, Kert.
You're going to do that.
So I mean, to some extent, what we don't want it to sound like is we're cutting corners.
That's right. Obviously not what I was getting at.
Right.
Yeah.
I know that's what you're saying, but it's not always about. So suppose you have a trial and we're going to look at 100, 200, 300 patients. If I say I'm going to run a trial to 300 patients, that's too big of a trial. I don't want to spend those resources. And so they build a smaller trial. But building a trial that can go bigger only in the cases you need to, but can stop if the effect is good earlier. So sometimes the important adaptations are you don't know the answer yet. More resources give you a much higher chance of getting the right answer. So Kert alluded to the insurance policy. So by being adaptive, you can potentially go longer because you only go there when you need to. If you say to the company, we're going to do a 500 patient trial, they're going to say, we can't do that. Well, okay, we'll do 200 to 500. You only go to 500 and you need it. That might be the alternative to a 350 patient trial. And it's so much more effective at answering the questions as Kert described. So sometimes being adaptive allows you to, right size the trial, Goldilocks, not too big, not too small.
Well, I hate the idea of saying there's a right size for a trial. I mean, when people say you need to do 350 patients, that's based on 20 patients that they observed in a single trial. They don't know it's 350 patients. We don't know it's 350 patients, as you said. Maybe it takes 200, maybe it takes 600. You want the trial to answer the question, not to be basically a gamble.
So people have answered this question, when should you adapt? And we should probably get around to answering that question. But they have said it's when you don't know the effect size. And so, Kert, you would say that's not how you would answer that question, I imagine.
So I would say no, that this is not only maybe I would say yes, but certainly if you don't know the effect size, if you don't know the population, if you don't know the arms, all of the things that go into a trial. I mean, we have conversations with clients where they're like, oh, here's the trial I want to run. And every time we ask them a question, do you know that you have the dose? No, not really. Do you know these are the right people? No, not really. What if the trial fails? Then I'd probably want to worry that I didn't enroll these people, or I worry I enrolled these. It's all about, what are you going to regret at the end of the trial, and try to prospectively add that in advance and make sure you don't regret it.
So I want to hammer on that idea, Kert. So, and let's call it anticipated regret. So it's a question we ask a lot of times. And it's interesting because a lot of clients in their interaction with statisticians are, oh, my effect size is delta. I know this, I know this, I know this. Give me the sample size. And if you can ask them, say, okay, suppose you run that trial and your trial is a p-value of 0.09. The trial's a failure. You're looking for a p-value below 0.025 perhaps. And the trial's a failure. You say, okay, you're looking at this trial, it failed. What do you wish you would have done differently? Just knowing that the trial failed. And then all of a sudden they open up and they say, maybe we enrolled the wrong patients. Maybe I should have tried a higher dose. But maybe I should have allowed for the trial to potentially go bigger. Maybe I was a little optimistic about that thing. And all of a sudden they open up all of their concerns of things they really don't know, but they came in, oh, I know this, I know this, I know this sort of thing. So this anticipated regret is one of the great answers to this question. If you run that trial and it quote unquote fails, and if you say, okay, I'm done, I know the answer, the drug doesn't work, it's over, that's good. That may be a question, maybe you don't need to do adaptive design. That's a perfect trial. But almost everybody in that circumstance has potential anticipated regret. And then immediately it's, okay, well, maybe we can design the trial to answer at least a couple of your biggest concerns.
I mean, I think the central answer, if I knew enough to perfectly design my trial, I wouldn't need to run my trial because I know what the answers are.
Right.
So so buyer's remorse would be another label for that. Maybe, this is me as a business person, so I'm thinking about the money involved, but to run that kind of thing. But it's like you can reduce that buyer's remorse or that anticipated regret because you can find things out along the way, which, by the way, is normal human life, that you learn things as you go, which is good.
Well, we've had clients, so they've run a trial, they get a p-value of 0.06. So it's not low enough. So they go to the FDA, they say, approve our drug anyway. The FDA says no. But the FDA says, well, you could run another trial. So they run another trial. They get a p-value of 0.07. Well, okay, now they're in a really bad place where they've invested a ton of money and they basically have no successful trial. Whereas if they had just prospectively set that up to be able to run a bigger trial at first, they would have had the same expenses, but they would have gotten a success.
Interesting. Are there ways that you can know what when it would be a good before you even begin the trial or thinking about it? Like, is there like a set of criteria you guys think about that is like, this is the best situation for an adaptive trial? Like if it's early stage, late stage, if there's like very high uncertainty or very innovative treatments or anything like that, that it's like right out off the bat, these are the kind of things that we should think about when you're thinking about adaptive trials.
I'll start. I was kind of hoping Kert would grab that, but yes, a lot of times early trials, learning trials are huge for adaptation. They're almost always in the process of learning, and adaptive trials allow you to sort of morph the trial and learn the right things, learn multiple things within that. So early phase, and we call phase one trials, every phase one trial is adaptive. Phase two, very much adaptive. A key part to that is time to information. Does the enrollment rate, does the time of getting data within patients allow you to learn something? And by the way, that's where the whole Bayesian thing comes in. So when Kert and I are designing these, that information that comes in, we use Bayesian modeling to then drive when to make decisions, how to optimize that in those scenarios when there is uncertainty in the trials. So timed information is huge, early phase, but late phase, I think every late phase trial should be adaptive. Within those, you can make them potentially a little bit larger, improve the power of the trial, less resources on it. It's really the cases where no are almost always the time to information thing fails. We talked to one client that this was a medical device for 10, 11, 12-year-old boys. And the endpoint was about it was about the back when they were a mature age. So they were going to enroll this trial, and there's no information they could get until the skeleton was fully mature. This is maybe 17, 18 years old. I mean, they would know absolutely nothing for 6 or 7 years. It's really hard to be adaptive in that trial because you just don't learn anything. So that, I think, is the single most important part. Is there something to be learned to make good adaptations?
I think as a practical matter, we also pick different adaptations at different stages of development. So they tend to be more complex adaptations. The field is more the wild, wild west, where you have lots of doses, lots of populations, lots of different questions. You get into phase 3, it's, okay, which of these 2 or 3 doses should I use? Should I only do mild or mild and severe patients? They're just more focused questions as you get to phase 3. And we still adapt, but we adapt in a smaller sandbox as we get there.
So phase 3, the most common adaptation is what's the sample size? And so that we do quite a bit of that, and you do what are called group sequential designs, promising zone designs, Goldilocks designs. So they're methods of getting the right sample size. And then as you go earlier, there may be enrichment strategies around the right patients as you're learning. Might be response adaptive randomization over doses or arms in the trial, which might be frequency, maybe other characteristics of it within the learning part, or seamless trials in that early things.
Do you have any, I'm just throwing this out here. Do you have any like hot takes on the way that trials are developed today that you wish people would know? That, let's say they're new to thinking about adaptive trials, they've heard this concept, they haven't really run any before, or they don't know all the specificity that you guys do. But if it's like, man, if they just knew this, I think that would send them over the edge and help make a decision, or something like, people talk this way about it, and it's really not like that at all. It's more like this.
So so Scott probably has a list of about 500 things to talk about right now. But so Scott was saying at the beginning, I'm going to steal his thunder about the notion of paying a penalty. People are always worried on, if I look at the data, I have to pay a penalty. And what you have to do is you have to take into account how you look at the data. But it's not paying a penalty. If I go to, say, my carnival at, the state fair, and they say, okay, you can throw a ball through a hoop, and if you get it through the hoop, you win. Okay, well, that's great. If they tell me I can throw it once, and that's a possibility, but I can also throw it twice through a slightly smaller hoop. In many cases, I want to throw the ball twice. I want multiple shots on goal. And what we do effectively is when we design trials, we try to figure out, what is the exact way that you want to play this game to maximize your power, your return on investment, whatever the case may be. But usually you're never paying a penalty. You always get a net gain from looking at the data.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting going back to the history of how this sort of came out, that somehow people created this notion that looking at data is bad. And people in design carry this with them. Oh, I don't want to do adaptive design. It's risky, sort of thing. So the other thing I'll add to what Kert said is the risky thing is picking a single sample size and going in 3 years and rolling the dice and looking at the results and hoping you got it right. That's risky. The adaptive design is the non-risky one in that. So what I'll add to Kert's thing is this is not Wizard of the Oz type designs that we carry. We go to the Wizard of Oz and he tells us with his incredible knowledge.
I would like that.
Yeah. with incredible knowledge that you should do this design. We simulate these designs, we explore them, we look at how well they work and don't work. And this is very much an iterative process. It's kind of an amazing process. I think everybody who's gone through that process where they go through the simulation of their design and they see potential results and say, oh, that would be bad. So, okay, let's change it to do this and this and this. And they go through this process. It's very therapeutic. And the process itself, even if you end up with the design you're at, is incredibly good process, but that's how we build the designs. It's hard work, it's simulation, it's thoroughly vetting everything with the design team. That process is what builds it. It's not this sort of magical thing that you go to the Wizard of Oz. That would be great though.
But we reject a lot of designs through that process where we go, we could do this fancy thing we think will help and get everything faster, and we put it on the computers. At the end of the day, oh, look, your power went up 1%. That was a terrible idea, but let's not do it, as opposed to, we don't put it in the practice. We don't put it in patients. We don't put it in the real trial. We don't spend the money on it. A computer finds it out overnight and we reject it in the morning.
There's the saying that the real trial you run shouldn't be the first time you run it. It should be the 1,000,000th and first time. That you should have run this trial 1,000,000 times through simulation. And so the building of these designs the process of that is a huge part of doing it. But don't come in with the idea that looking at data is bad.
And that seems really helpful. And it seems like there's so much upside. Why aren't more organizations doing this? Or are there disadvantages to running an adaptive trial that people should think about, or just maybe there's downsides to it? How do you think about that?
There's a couple answers to that. One is a lack of expertise still. I think that's getting better and better and better. I know Scott started this company, 5,000 years ago, and he was the only person who knew how to do it, which isn't true. But now there are multiple companies that do this. This is a fairly standard expertise of various levels out there. So that's been building that infrastructure has been a key part of the last 20 years. The other aspect to it is regulatory agencies, the FDA, for example. These are, there are moving parts to this. It's a complicated beast. And I think a regulatory agency reasonably wants to go pretty slow and sure on this. And so that's been, till about 2010 or so, that held things back, I think, as people got used to this. But that's gotten much better in the past 10 years or so. And Scott, I know you're itching at the bit to take that.
Yeah. I think there are numbers. I agree with Kert that it's gotten much better. In 25 years, it's in doing this, 24 and a half, not quite 5,000 years.
Okay.
It has gotten better. More of them are done. There's still I mean, there's several things. It's changing the way things are done. You run it. I've been doing clinical trials for 20 years. They can cut and paste from their previous one. They're little, it's a bit of this is the way things are done, and so it's changed. It's different. It's different for people to do it that way. Sometimes there's the lack of the expertise of that. Sometimes there's a perception that people won't accept it. It's amazing. The FDA says no to far less than people think they do, because nobody has done it. The FDA must have said no, and well, no, they haven't said no, which is people haven't proposed it. So there's, and there's also a little bit of, I'll do it when 10 companies have done it and all got approved within a drug. So I'll be the 11th one.
So Scott, I'm going to chime in on the no
Yes.
aspect. I think part of this may also be the way regulatory agencies communicate. When you get a letter from the FDA that says, I want to do an adaptive design, they often phrase this as, no, we do not agree. And then they give a whole bunch of reasons. And if you've read enough of these, no, I do not agree could be you have a minor problem that's easy to fix. It could be, we have a complete, you will never do this with our permission. Most of the trials we go through, there is something that we have to address, but usually it's minor and it requires small changes. So we have a very good track record about getting things through the FDA. And I won't say we get 100% of every trial that we propose, but we get 95. What would be a good number, Scott?
Yeah, it's quite high. I agree. It's a little bit like when you submit journals, the articles to a journal. The journal comes back and say, no, we reject your paper. Fix these things. It's a revise and resubmit, which in most cases means they're going to accept it. If you do those things, they're going to accept it.
And a lot of times you don't have reviewer too.
Yeah. You just fix them and they don't say it. So it's so odd, because in the first time people go through this process, they get this no. And it's, oh my God, so much work I put into this. And you say, oh, this is great. Just fix these things. And so a little bit of that happens in designs too. So there are times where we read these and we say, oh, this is fantastic. You should even cancel the meeting with the FDA. And wait a minute, really? So there is a little bit of that. So a lot of it is just changing the usual practice. It's a little bit different. They're seeing more and more of these. So it is changing. The world is getting better. And the interesting part of it, it has to. I mean, this is a wall we're running into. The costs are way too high. There are way too many good medical treatments out there that kind of get behind in the line because we're not learning more. We're not doing more. The medical therapies are absolutely phenomenal. And so it's come to a head where we have to design better, smarter trials. We don't have a choice. A little bit like COVID, we didn't have a choice. So huge innovation took place in a couple of years that probably would have taken 10 to 15 normally.
Necessity is the mother of invention. Well, I know that another fear you guys have is that, now with ChatGPT, anybody can design an adaptive trial.
I've tried. It does not work.
No? Oh, no. No. So what I'm hearing is maybe you need a little bit more expertise.
Well, but actually, it's a good question. Do you have any joking response? But there is an important part about, if I ask ChatGPT, give me a response adaptive trial, it will write out a set of instructions on how to do the math of the trial. But what it won't do is it won't ask you through the probing questions. Are you asking the right questions? Do you have the right endpoint? This concept of anticipated regret. It will essentially answer the question that you ask. But most of our clients, what we're really trying to figure out is, what is the question? And none of that happens in ChatGPT yet. So when it does, I could retire.
It's a little bit of that, $100 to hammer a nail in the house, $2 for the nail, but $98 to know where to hammer it. That kind of analogy. Cool.
And we have to pull it out and put it somewhere else, and pull it out and put it somewhere else, and figure out, we learn where the right place to put the nail is. Yeah.
I like that. Well, any closing thoughts as you were to answer this question, should I think about an adaptive trial? Where? Any kind of like closing thoughts, takeaways? I wish somebody knew this.
Yeah. It's one of those things that if you're thinking maybe I should be doing it, you probably do. want to do it. So it's really look at a fixed trial. Look at that trial and ask yourself, is that answering all you want to answer? And if the answer is no, I might want to do, then that's, okay, maybe I should be looking at an adaptive design.
Love that. Love that. Well, gentlemen, thank you both very much for your expertise. Kert, I also hear you're a chess champion. I wish you the best success in your chess career if
Thank you.
ChatGPT ends up solving these problems for us. But but guys,
Problem
thank
is
you so much.
ChatGPT can probably beat him at chess.
Oh,
but
no
not at
doubt.
clinical
Ooh.
trials. But not at
Really?
trial design. Yeah.
Okay, okay. I need to see this. Kert versus ChatGPT Chess Championship 2025 coming up soon. All right, guys. Thanks so much. Kert, I know we'll be seeing so much more of you in future episodes, so we will look forward to that, and we will catch you next time.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.
In the interim.